Te presentamos a Peter Kelly. Peter Kelly tiene una licenciatura en Filosofía y Lenguaje y una maestría en Filosofía por la Universidad de York, Inglaterra. Tiene estudios, diplomas y certificados en Lingüística Aplicada y Educación por el British Council, el Instituto Anglo-Mexicano de Cultura, el Centro Universitario Villanueva y la Universidad de Carolina del Norte. Actualmente, él es consultor académico para escuelas y universidades en México y un formador de profesores a nivel nacional. Tiene más de 35 años de experiencia como profesor en primaria, secundaria, bachillerato y universidad, enseñando literatura inglesa, historia, escritura creativa, inglés como lengua extranjera, filosofía, teoría del conocimiento y pensamiento crítico y creativo. Ha impartido conferencias, cursos y talleres sobre temas como lingüística, formación de profesores, enseñanza del inglés como lengua extranjera, programas de desarrollo profesional, entre otros. Es autor y coautor de 7 libros de texto de enseñanza del idioma inglés para escuelas secundarias y editor del programa Self-English de Grupo Educare. Démosle la bienvenida a Peter Kelly.
Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar. And this one is all about classroom management. So first of all, what is that? Well, it refers to the numerous skills and the techniques that teachers use to keep students well behaved and academically productive in the classroom. If it's done well, classroom management helps teachers minimize the amount of unacceptable classroom behaviors that actually impede or prevent learning. And it helps us to maximize the behaviors that promote learning. So let's have a look at this in some depth. We can represent it in a pyramid structure like this, because essentially there are 3 things involved in classroom management. At the base of this diagram, the pyramid, we can see the ideas of rapport and ambience. Then above that, we have the ideas of teaching and learning. And at the very top, if you notice, the smallest part is that of actual behavior management. As we can see, classroom management is not all about behavior management. It is not all about controlling the student's behavior. There's much more to it than that. Let's have a look at the first part, rapport and ambience. Rapport and ambience. Rapport refers to the relationship between the teacher and the students and between the students themselves, how well they get along together. This is an essential aspect of our job as teachers, educators. In terms of the rapport, the teacher obviously should be friendly. I know there are limits and we have to draw the line, but friendship, an atmosphere of friendship, is essential for good rapport. We are their friends up to a certain point. That has to be balanced with firmness. A teacher also has to be firm. The friendliness has limits. Beyond those limits, firmness is required. The teacher's manner, the teacher's way of being is what we're looking at here. Limits must be set, and firmness is required to establish those limits and maintain them. The teacher must also be empathetic. We have to understand our students, understand the situations they are in at home, with their friends, with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and with the school. We have to put ourselves, if you like, in their shoes often to understand what's happening if things seem to be going wrong. We have to be just, to be fair. This is very important. We have to be fair in the way we attend the students, fair in the way we share our attention to all the students, fair in the way we evaluate the students, etc. And we have to be encouraging. We have to encourage them. Yes, they can. Nothing they're required to do in schools is usually beyond them. With some effort, some careful thought, and some encouragement and support, then yes, they can. These are some of the main aspects of creating a good rapport with the students. We have to be organized. Teachers have to be organized. This is part of creating the ambience. A teacher who is organized has an organized desk. The desk is well ordered. The materials and things that the teacher uses are in their place. The ambience also refers to the organization of our classes. We have to have well-planned classes. Punctuality is part of this. The teacher and the students, obviously, but the teacher must be punctual. The materials used by the teacher for teaching purposes, they must be well organized too. However, ambience also refers to colors, to the classroom decoration, to the distribution of the desks, the tables where the students are working. All this creates, if done well, an ambience, an atmosphere that is conducive to the learning and teaching that we are hoping to achieve. So that refers to the base of the pyramid. As you can see, it might well be the most important part for establishing classroom management successfully. Let's look at the second part of the pyramid, the learning and the teaching. Here we have many characteristics or aspects to consider. This is probably not a complete list, but we can go through these things one by one to see what they really mean. In terms of the learning, we should be promoting autonomy. We should be doing as much as we can to help the students become independent of us and independent of the textbook itself. The better they can learn by themselves, the more success we have. I think, as maybe has been mentioned before, our ultimate goal as teachers or educators is to be unnecessary, to not be necessary anymore. They have achieved all they need to achieve from us. They do not require our help anymore. They have become autonomous. It seems paradoxical, but we have more students coming in the next year, so we don't lose that flow of our profession that's so important to us. But each individual student should, as far as possible, become independent of the teacher and the book. In terms of the learning, we have to attend to the students' needs. What do they need from us? What do they need from me as a teacher? I have to be able to identify those needs, whether they're personal needs or learning needs or even professional needs with adults. What do they need from us? How can I attend those needs? We must take into account the learning styles, the various learning styles that students may demonstrate. Some students are very visual, as you know. Some students are very kinesthetic, as you know. Are we ensuring that our planning and execution of the plans covers all those different styles that exist? Valid assessments. This is very important. A big part of our job is to evaluate or assess how well they are doing in the class, how much they are learning, and what they are having trouble with. The ways, the mechanisms we use to assess this progress must be valid. That is an important term, validity of assessment. They must be covering what we taught in a similar way to what we taught and practiced with them. The assessments must be fair and reliable. In terms of the activities we use in the classroom to help the learning develop, we have to make sure that these activities are relevant to the students, that they see the relevance to themselves, There's an element of personalization here. The interest level must also be high. We must choose as much as we can activities and materials that are interesting to the students. This will definitely help them learn better. Is the language level adequate? Is the second language level adequate? Are we going too high or too low with the levels? We must balance that. At their level and a little bit more is the normal level to aim at. Variety, as we say in English, variety is the spice of life. Variety in the classroom is definitely necessary. We have to have a variety of many things. We have to have a variety of activities, of skills development. We have a variety of interaction patterns, etc. It should not be monotonous. Each individual class, the class development, there should be a clear start to the class. It should start at the time indicated, and it should start in an effective way. Taking the register or the roll is probably not the best way to start every class. Logical development. The class must develop in a way that is logical and in a way that is seen to be logical by the students. Transitions between activities. They must be short and sharp. There should not be time wasted between each activity. The timing and the pacing of each activity should be adequate. The timing is how many minutes it lasts, and the pace is the rhythm. Whether it's a fast rhythm or a slow rhythm depends on the activity type. But we must have variety there. And there should be closure to the class. There should not just be the bell ringing and the student standing up in the middle of what you're saying. There should be closure, which is often a necessary thing for complete understanding of what the class was all about. And in terms of interactions, the groupings, if you prefer, we should make sure there are opportunities for students to work in pairs, to work in groups, and to work in teams. Groups suggests collaboration, teams suggest competition. But this should be a part of what we do every week. There should be plenty of opportunity for students to work together, not just in a lockstep formation with the teacher. Now we come to the third part, the behavior management, which is the main focus today. Behavior management. How do we manage students' behavior? Well, first we have to distinguish between two types of behavior. The first type is unacceptable classroom behavior. Classroom behavior that is not appropriate for the learning and teaching processes. Here we can subdivide this into two types of unacceptable classroom behavior. The first is called non-disruptive, off-task behavior. And that basically means that students are not paying attention or working, but they are not affecting other people. They are not affecting the other students, and they are not affecting you as the teacher. But they are not paying attention. So it's off task because they're not paying attention or working, but it's non-disruptive because they are not affecting other people in the classroom. But then we have the disruptive off-task behavior. And as you can probably see, here the students are not paying attention or working because it's off task, but it is disruptive. That means they are affecting the teaching and learning processes of the other students and you. Let's have a look at these in a bit more detail. First, the non-disruptive off-task behavior. Examples are looking out of the window. The student is staring out of the window, maybe looking at the sports activities going on outside. Or maybe they're doing work from another subject. Maybe immediately after your class, there is another class, maybe mathematics, and that teacher left homework, the students didn't do it, so they try to do it during your class. They're not interrupting anybody else, remember, they're just not focusing on what's happening in your classroom. They could be doodling instead of listening or reading. Or they could be daydreaming with their heads on the desk. Although these are clear examples, sometimes this type of non-disruptive off-task behavior is not easy to detect. We have to sort of imagine a scenario where a student has got their head on the desk. And we have to ask ourselves, is that student daydreaming? Or is she thinking deeply about the topic at hand? To be fair, remember fairness, just teachers must not accuse students of doing something they're not actually doing. So it can be quite tricky to identify if the student is actually thinking about what she wants to say or what she's just read, or if she is in fact daydreaming. We have to be very careful here. Disruptive off-task behavior. Here we have some clear examples: students shouting out in class continually, some students throwing things around the classroom, students moving around chatting to other students while you're trying to teach, students who talk back to you, who are insolent, and the case of bullying. Sometimes bullying can occur in a classroom. All these are disruptive. They interrupt the learning of others and the teaching of yourself, and they are obviously off task. And usually this is much easier to detect. It's very obvious if someone threw something, or if someone is bullying somebody, or if someone is shouting out in class. Now let's look at teaching styles. We can divide teaching styles into several groups. Two of them here I want to talk about. Two unacceptable teaching styles. First is the antagonistic style. Here the teacher shouts a lot at the students. Here the teacher can use threats when trying to control the students who are misbehaving. And often the teacher will resort to using sarcasm. Now, I think you can all agree that these characteristics are quite unacceptable. They don't really solve the problem. Why do teachers behave like this? Yes, it's down to personality in a sense, but also it's down to the style of teaching and what's going on in the teacher's minds and hearts. Often at the root of the antagonistic style are certain fears. Fears of losing control, fears of losing respect in their own eyes. Often an antagonistic teacher can control the students. The students do behave sometimes with this type of teaching style. But there is a cost. The cost is the students often are humiliated or scared. And I don't think to have students who are scared of us or who feel humiliated by what we say is the way to go. I'm sure you agree. These teachers often see the classroom as a battlefield. If you listen to the comments they may make in the teacher's room, in the staff room, you may identify an attitude that sees the classroom as a negative place to be. Some teachers even revert to saying, when the bell rings at the end of the recess, okay, back to the mines, back to the battlefield. It's a real shame that some teachers have this attitude. Burnout is also a possible cause. The teachers have been teaching for a long time. They have found the teaching to become more and more difficult every year. They lose the passion. They lose the love of the job. They lose their interest in the students. These teachers often, at a certain point, leave or leave for various reasons. This is not the way to handle classrooms. The other unacceptable style is called the diffidence style. Here we have teachers who have no real classroom presence. Their personality and their style of teaching renders them almost invisible to the students. The typical characteristics of a teacher who is like this is that they are very insecure about their place in the classroom. They are very passive, and they are inconsistent. Inconsistency refers to one day, for example, a student is doing something wrong and the teacher applies a sanction or a punishment. The next day, other students are doing the same thing, wrong, but she doesn't do anything, or he doesn't do anything. So there's inconsistency in the application of any sanctions or consequences that should be applied. The students, therefore, don't really know what the limits are. Passivity, the student is passive in front of misbehavior, tends not to do anything, if possible, because they don't feel secure enough to handle it. This is the diffidence style. Let's think a little bit about a few important ideas. I think it's fair to say that students and teachers have the right to the best working classroom environment possible. Not all working classroom environments are perfect by any means. All the ones I've ever met or been in are missing something at least. But we have the right to the best working classroom environment possible. The students and the teachers, I feel, have this right. And it's the teachers and it's the school's responsibility to provide this. However, it is the teachers who have the obligation to provide this classroom environment as much as possible. The students don't have that obligation. It's interesting. The school and the teachers do have the obligation to provide this service, if you would, the best classroom environment possible. Some other ideas to think about. Except certain students who have a variety of emotional problems, all students can behave when they choose to. That's a very important point, I think. We can expect students to behave well because they can choose to do so if they wish. Apart from those few students who do have those unfortunate problems, the vast majority of our students actually can make that choice. So our role, in a sense, becomes trying to help them choose the appropriate behavior. We teach them to choose the right behavior. Teaching English, I think, has been mentioned many times. We don't actually teach English. The way it is expressed in the English language allows for this ambiguity to be sort of covered or expressed. We don't actually teach English. English is not studying anything, the language itself. You're not teaching the language anything. The English language doesn't need to be taught anything. So we're not actually teaching English. We are teaching people. We are teaching students. This is the important point I'm trying to make. We are giving the students opportunities through a tool called English language, but we are actually teaching the students things. We're not teaching the English language anything. So we must keep in mind that it's people-oriented, people-based. And in that sense, we are all educators. Doesn't matter what we teach in any school, doesn't matter the subject. We're more involved in education than in specific teaching. As part of that, students' behaviors, students' attitudes, students' emotional, intelligent, physical development are all to do with what we do in the classroom. It's not just transmitting information. So we can help students by helping them to realize they have choices. They can choose the good, they can choose the bad, and there are consequences either way. One way to achieve this is to have an effective class management plan. This is something I want to focus on at the moment. a class management plan. Given what we have already seen, that the top of the pyramid, which is behavioral management, is the smallest part of what we are concerned with here. However, it is a very vital part. Class management plan. What is it? Before we talk about what it is essential that we as teachers know and are totally familiar with the school philosophy, as well as the rules, the regulations, and the norms in the school. We're going to create a plan for handling the class in terms of the behavior of the students. We cannot do anything that goes against the school philosophy or goes against the rules or the regulations or even the norms of the school. Our classroom plan must fit perfectly within that set of parameters. What is a classroom management plan? It is three things. First is a set of class rules that students follow at all times in your class. Secondly, it is positive recognition for students who follow the rules. Those students who respect the rules and follow them have to be recognized for doing that. Not rewarded, just recognized. Consequences for students who break the rules is the third part. The word is consequences, not punishment. That's an important difference. Classroom rules. Classroom rules, what are they? We have to create a minimum number of rules which are in effect every day, during all activities, all day long. When we are teaching in a classroom, these are a small number of rules, the minimum required for allowing effective teaching and learning, but they have to be in effect all the classroom. Every day we teach them, and during all activities. The important thing here is the minimum number of rules. We don't need many rules to help us create that important ambience in our classroom. Here are some examples of classroom rules. Follow all the teacher's directions or instructions. Be on task always. Keep your bags behind your seat. Listen when others are speaking. Now, these 4 rules are very specific, very practical, and they are there for obvious reasons. We have to have the students following our instructions all the time, not just sometimes. They should always be on task, doing what they're supposed to do in your classroom. They can keep their bags behind the seat because if they put them beside the seat, that creates obstacles for you when you are walking around monitoring. It's a risk. So if they put their bags behind their seats, then the passageway between each row is clear for you to walk around through. And when others are speaking, they should be listening, not speaking at the same time or not listening. Very practical rules. So we make a list of rules that will help create the class environment that you all need, you and your students. It's always a very good idea to consider involving students in choosing some of the rules. As long as your set of rules don't go against any of the parameters established by the school itself, then you can teach these rules to your students. But rather than impose them, invite them to participate in creating this set of rules. You will discover very quickly that they already know what rules should be applied. Once you have the rules established, then I would suggest placing a chart in the room, on the door, on the wall, a big chart, where the rules are clearly written. Now here comes the discussion. Is it rules or is it values? What do we put on our chart? Here's an example of a chart containing some classroom rules. Raise your hand. Be kind. Be patient. Be respectful. Always listen. Let's look at two of those and compare it, or one of those, and compare it to what we've just already said. Let's look at the difference between be respectful and put your bags behind your chair. You should realize there's a huge difference there. Here we can raise your hand and be respectful. We can compare these two. One of them is very practical and isn't in itself a value. The other, be respectful, is not practical, but it is a value. I would suggest we don't mix these things up. We don't confuse them. Rules are practical. Values are not. Behind each rule, there is a value, of course, and often the value of respect. Raise your hand, well, behind that, I think, is the idea of being respectful to those who are speaking. So raise your hand is clearly visible, clearly measurable, and when students don't do it, it's obvious. And if there's going to be any consequence for not raising your hand, then it would be clear why it should be applied, because the fact that they didn't raise their hand is clear to all, especially the person who did it or didn't do it. Whereas be respectful, well, that is a value that's essential. All the values are a school-wide concern. All the people in the school are or should be involved in establishing and promoting values. But in your particular classroom, the values are there, and you should be working to make sure the students respect those values and live them. But they don't help you move around the classroom. Putting bags behind the chair will help you move around the classroom and give you the opportunity to monitor more safely, which is very practical and necessary. I would suggest the classroom rules should be simply practical. One of the reasons is that there are gray areas. Do we all have the same understanding of respect? Some students, young males, for example, in junior high school, the way they are together, the way they get along, often could be interpreted as disrespectful. But from their point of view, it's not. They push each other, they even insult each other, but it's a type of relationship that they accept. Those behaviors within that relationship, for them, are not disrespectful. It's just the way they get along. However, an elderly teacher might find what they say or do to be disrespectful or appear to be disrespectful to the other student. And there we have a gray area. The student can sort of defend himself or herself by saying, that's the way we are, that's the way we get along, we do that. We love each other, but that's how we play. And the teacher might find that disrespectful and say, no, that is disrespectful. And there we have an area where the student and teachers disagree, and fairness is involved there. We have to be empathetic, remember? So I would suggest be patient, be kind, be respectful, not be included in the list of rules. Raise your hand, always listen, are two clear classroom rules, and if students don't do those things, it's black and white. There's no discussion needed, and there's no subjectivity involved. So I suggest a minimum number of classroom rules, but all the rules should be practical. And at the same time, remembering the values involved, yes, they have to be promoted, and they can be mentioned as being part of what creates the rule, a value. Now, that was the first part of the classroom management plan. The second part is recognition of good behavior. We don't reward students necessarily. Some teachers do, but probably a better way is the simple recognition of good behavior. And this can take various forms. Why do we want to do this? Well, there are several reasons. One is it motivates students to continue behaving appropriately. If we recognize in the correct way students' good behavior, that motivates them to continue behaving like that. It also helps boost students' self-esteem. Self-esteem is an essential aspect of what we do. Students at certain ages do lack self-esteem. As we know, they go through phases of development where they see themselves in a negative light. They feel they are not capable, not likable, etc. They need help with this. And recognizing that they do things well can help them understand that they are more than they think they are sometimes. It reduces anxiety. Some students get stressed easily by the amount of work or the level of difficulty of the work, and they can become anxious. If we recognize when they do things well, when they behave well, we can help reduce that anxiety to a certain amount. It definitely reduces misbehavior. Because of the first point, it motivates students to do things well, to work well, to behave well. Consequently, there's a reduction in misbehavior. And it will naturally improve rapport between you and your students. They like that they are recognized. They like their good behavior to be noticed, not just taken for granted. So for these reasons and many more, we should recognize good behavior. But the question is how? How do we recognize good behavior? Well, there are various ways. I think we should be careful to avoid the behavioristic techniques that are involved in some classes. I repeat, the difference is recognition. The difference must be understood that recognition is not rewarding. If a student behaves well, some teachers think, why should I do anything? Because that's what they're supposed to do. Why should I even recognize it? Why should I definitely reward it? Some teachers think that good behavior should be rewarded. And some teachers go to the extreme of offering a video movie day or pizza day once a month if the students behave well. Some teachers have a jar, and in the jar they put, for example, marbles. And every time the students behave well, the teacher puts a marble in the jar. And if students misbehave, she will remove a marble. And once the marbles get to a certain height, once the students have behaved appropriately enough, then there is a reward, maybe a movie day on Friday at the end of the month or something like that. This happens. Maybe you yourselves have done this. We have to remember Pavlov. We can train our students to behave using these rewards, extrinsic motivation. They want the Friday off, they want the movie day, they want the pizzas or something. And they behave well just because they want those things, not because they think they should behave. They're choosing to behave for the wrong reason. They should choose to behave for the right reasons. And if we overdo the amount of rewarding, we tend to educate them in the wrong way. The right way is to recognize, and that can be done with a simple look, with a simple pat on the shoulder, with a simple comment like great or good, not overdone and not every time, but not enough for the students to notice that you have noticed that they are behaving well and you have acknowledged that. That's very different to rewarding it. You can write a little note. You can write a note in their workbook, their notebook. You can just give them a look as you walk around. You can just pat them on the shoulder to show that you have recognized what they did. These things are simple, but very powerful. And they are usually more than enough than anything else we might be sort of inclined to do. So that is number two. Number one was a list of rules. which help create the perfect environment as much as possible. Number 2 is recognition of good behavior. And obviously the third one is consequences. I repeat, not punishment, but consequences. There will be times when some students choose not to follow the rules, and they therefore misbehave. They have made a choice. They have made a choice, usually impromptu, not planned, to disobey. When this occurs, our response must be to prepare or to deal with it calmly, quickly, and effectively. 3 important response characteristics. We must keep calm. Even if the misbehavior seems as an attack on us, we must keep calm. We're just the person there. We're just the target. It's usually not personally against the teacher. It's usually the teacher is there representing authority, the teacher is there as an adult, and for some reason, the student at that point in time is against adults or authority or something. They just take it out on us. It's not usually a personal attack on our being. If we can understand that, then we don't react to what they do. A simple reaction would not be effective. We have to keep calm, keep our distance from what's going on, and prepare to deal with it in that way. We must also deal with it quickly. We mustn't leave it. We mustn't take too much time. This is usually in public, during a class, and we have things to do. So we must deal with it not just calmly, but also quickly. And obviously, we must deal with it effectively. What we do or say must work, in the sense that it must stop the misbehavior in the right way. So, when misbehavior occurs, keep that in mind. Don't go down to the student's level. Don't engage with the students at their level. You're the adult, they're not. Things are going on in their lives that we don't know about. It's rarely personal. We're just the person or the adult in front, and they take it out on us. There's no reason to feel fear or to feel insecure. We're the adult. Be calm, fix it quickly, and make sure you do it right. Now, what do we not mean by consequences? This is maybe just as important as what do we do mean by consequences. Any consequence that is applied for misbehavior, for breaking the rules, must in no way physically or psychologically harm the students. It must not be humiliating or physically painful, for example. This obviously takes out of the possibilities, removes from the possibilities any sort of physical punishment. These days, obviously, that is something that is quite unacceptable. And we must not humiliate or embarrass the students in public or in private. So no harm, physically done or psychologically done, is acceptable. However, we must not, through the consequence, create a negative appreciation of aspects that are academic. For example, as a consequence, and here I'm going to use the word punishment to make it more clear, as a punishment, you cannot say, take out your book and read. That will obviously give the students the idea that reading is a negative. And our job is to make them love reading, to be good readers, readers for life. And we can't use reading as a punishment. Back to the term consequence. We can't use reading books as punishment. We can either say, write 100 times, I must be good in class. This creates a very negative idea of what writing is. This is like Bart Simpson writing on the board. dozens of times the same sentence. This in no way helps students choose to behave correctly. And at the same time, it gives them a very negative appreciation of what are very important aspects of their academic development. Another point to consider is the consequences do not have to be severe to be effective. Don't punish yourself along with the students. Telling the student, or even in excess, the whole group to stay in recess because one or two of them misbehaved is way over the top. It doesn't match the severity of the misbehavior. We don't have to be severe to be effective. Consequently, what do we mean by consequences? First, repeat. This is very important. The consequences you are going to apply must respect the rules and policies of the school. If, for example, the school does not allow students to be removed from the class and to stand outside the classroom, then you cannot use that, obviously, as one of your consequences. You cannot say to the students, okay, go outside of the classroom, stand there, think about what you did, and come back in 5 minutes. If the school doesn't allow that sort of thing, you cannot do it. The consequences should be something students find displeasing, no more than displeasing. But, very importantly, it should also give them the opportunity to reconsider their choices. It's not just a reaction against bad behavior. It has to be converted into an opportunity for the students to reconsider their behavior and the choices they're making regarding that. The list of consequences should be organized into a hierarchy. Let's look at that. But first, consequences are best expressed as a choice. An example is, Robert, if you continue to talk while I am talking, you will have to sit apart from all the others. You choose. There is a clear statement of what the student is doing wrong. There is a clear statement of what the consequence will be. And there is a clear statement that the student has a choice. So in that small paragraph, you're covering everything that you need to cover in your class management plan. What is the behavior required? What is the consequence if it doesn't happen? And it actually comes down to a choice that you're making. For 70% of your students, a warning is usually all that is needed. You don't need to do more than to say, Robert, please stop that. Because if not, this will happen. Most of your students will get back on track once you do that. For another 25%, maybe a short, simple consequence will be enough. Probably only 5% of your students, that's 5 out of every 100, would create greater problems by being like that. Don't create your list of consequences with these 5% in mind. Create your list of consequences with the majority of the students in mind. An example of a hierarchy of consequences. Imagine this situation. A student is doing homework from another subject in your class. I'm pretty sure you've all experienced this. The hierarchy of consequences. Here is a very suitable hierarchy. The first time it happens, within a given period of time, maybe a class or a week or a month, you decide. The first time it happens, the student is given a verbal warning and a choice. If that student repeats that same misbehavior, and then the second time, maybe you write the student's name in a log or on the board, but the choice is repeated. They must always be aware that they have the choice. If, for some reason, the student does it again, then a more displeasing consequence must be applied. In this case, I would say that the student is told to stay in class during part of a recess and to reflect on and write about what she is doing and why it is wrong. Now, how long would be acceptable? I would suggest that 5 minutes of the recess would be quite adequate in most cases, especially with the younger children. 5 minutes of sitting with the teacher in the classroom while the classmates are outside in recess is quite a long time for young children. But it's not just sit down and think. They should think about what they're doing, and they should write about it to consolidate it, to see on paper their thoughts. And I would add here that if work was not done during the time that she was doing the homework from another subject, part of that time that she is missing recess or he's missing recess should be dedicated to catching up on the work that wasn't done. A chat or a conversation or a dialogue, if you like, with the student at some point could also be very, very much effective. The student, for some reason in this case, is doing something repeatedly wrong. There's something going on. This should be discovered by the teacher through a small conversation or chat with that student. When we have the classroom rules, I think we should communicate these classroom rules to the students. As a director of a school, I would expect the teacher to have the classroom rules, have them authorized by the authorities in the school, maybe the coordinator or the section director, to make sure there's no contradiction working in the rules, set of rules. But you have to communicate the rules to your students. As suggested before, we should have a poster somewhere put up, very big poster, very clear. The classroom rules should be just there. The consequence is probably not going to be printed. But don't just communicate it by telling them. Don't just communicate it by reading the rules to them. I suggest teaching it to your students, actually teaching the rules. I know teachers who, for example, at the beginning of a semester with new students, they dedicate one of the classes during the first week to establishing the classroom rules with the students. They have a conversation about what do you think should be the limits in the classroom, what behavior will help us achieve success in the learning and teaching. And together they come up with a list of 4 or 5 rules, which are all very practical, measurable, and don't involve gray areas where discussions or disagreement could occur. But then I've seen these teachers actually teach it to their students. So they have like a role play where the teacher says, okay, what is rule number 1? It is rule number 1 is raise your hand when you want to speak. Okay, so then the teacher chooses one student to actually break the rule on purpose as a sort of simulation. And then the teacher organizes a discussion, and most of the students are putting their hands up, but this one student doesn't. He interrupts on purpose to demonstrate that the rule is being broken. Then the teacher stops and says, what rule was broken? And the students say, he didn't put his hand up. Okay, now what would be the consequence if that happened? And then the teacher would show what the consequence would be, at least for the first time. So in that way, rule by rule, the teacher is modeling using a simulation or a role play, so the students actually are being taught the rules, not just told the rules. This is very important. Now, finally, the 5% I mentioned before. Occasionally, for various reasons, many of them unknown to us, the students are in a certain mood, which means they are quite willing to disobey all the rules if necessary. They have a need to express themselves in a negative way, caused by things that are going on at home, in their private life, their personal life, caused by things outside of school or maybe inside of school. But in many cases, we are not aware of this. And sometimes they seriously challenge our authority. An example could be a student is playing with the cell phone while you're teaching, and you walk around, get closer to the student and say, please put it away and focus on the class, and the student says no. And then you react by saying, okay, now give me the cell phone, and the student says, no, I'm not going to give it to you. And the student puts the cell phone back in his pocket. This is, if you like, in your face challenge. The student is, in a sense, challenging you and trying to take away your authority. This rarely happens, but it does happen. Now, what can we do in cases like this? It does depend on the school's approach to these particular types of serious disobedience. But in general, if possible, isolate the student from the rest of the group. The rest of the group are probably his fan base. And he's probably going to, or she's probably going to act up even more because many of the students, the classmates, are secretly enjoying this. Okay, so having seen about the 95%, let's look at the 5%, those who might seriously challenge your authority. Here we're talking about cases like the following. A student is, during your class, texting another student on his or her cell phone. You slowly approach the student and discreetly you ask the student to put the phone back and focus on the work. And the student refuses. And you say, okay, now please give me the phone, and it's now confiscated. Pick it up at the end of the class or the end of the week. And the student says no, and puts the phone back. Here is a clear case of your authority being challenged. The student is trying to take away your authority. Usually at this point, members of the class, other members have also noticed what is happening. In these cases, try to isolate the student from the group if possible. The group, in many cases, is the student's fan base. Many of them might actually be enjoying this or be very curious about what you're going to do. So, if possible, remove the student from the group, isolate the student. Refocus the conversation with the student back to the point. What do you want the student to do and why? Repeat that. If the student still disobeys, still refuses, then clearly state what the consequence will be if the student doesn't obey. And very importantly, ask if the student understands. By this point, most students will deflate and probably cede and obey. Most cases, this clarity will help them understand they have to choose the right way. If, unfortunately, that fails to remedy the problem, then I would suggest that the next step must be passing the situation, the problem, to the next authority. You have probably done, in most cases, all that you should be expected to do to help remedy this situation. However, we can't just leave it there. We have to contemplate. Me as a teacher, what went wrong here? Why did this happen? What was my role here? Did I respond well? What is my relationship with this particular student? Is there something there that might be involved? And we have to understand very clearly that students do not really care how much we know about the subject until they know how much we care about them as people. So here there is some sort of breakdown in the rapport between you and that student. It's very important that we explore that, what happened and why. And as soon as possible, and in the best way possible, try to regain that trust, that rapport with the student who did that. So, in sum, our attitude, our classroom ambience, our professionalism, and our classroom management plan altogether will go a long, long way in helping reduce or even eradicate misbehavior in our classes. Thank you very much. Hope you learned a little bit about this. I certainly enjoyed it myself. Hope you did. Goodbye. Take care.